The corridor hummed with the low breath of vents, white alloy walls stretching in seamless lines that erased shadow. Naira Prime's night cycle was sterile, unfeeling, designed to discourage loitering. Shaw's boots struck the tiles in a steady rhythm, posture straight as if he were still marching in formation. He carried himself the same way, whether he was headed into a battlefield or toward his narrow bunk after a 14-hour shift inspecting stress lines in the thermal ducts. Order steadied him. Silence steadied him. After years of war and years of crawling ducts where a bad weld could mean a frozen deck of bodies, he had no patience for surprises. But Junction C-19 didn't obey his rules. She stood in the center strip, bare feet pressed to metal that leached warmth straight from her skin. Her hair red tangled strands, threaded with chipped pearl beads, fell in limp lines down her shoulders. Torn veils clung to her hips, the kind sold in festival markets, meant for laughter and bright music, not corridors like this. Her skin, pale blue with a faint natural luminescence, made her look almost spectral beneath the harsh lights. In her hands were 2 battered credit chips, edges cracked, like she'd been clutching them too long. 2 credits, she said, voice rough but clear. Enough for a blanket. Or 10 minutes by a heater. Shaw stopped. The words shouldn't have touched him. He had walked past beggars before, closed his ears to offers and pleas, but the way she said them carried no bargain, no attempt at manipulation. It was a ledger statement. What she had left, what it might buy. A man in a gray coat hurried past, eyes fixed on the floor. 2 clerks from admin brushed by without breaking stride. None slowed. Shaw didn't move either, but not because he wanted to ignore her. His chest tightened the way it always did before he made a choice that would complicate his life. His hand twitched toward the flask at his hip. He studied her quickly, the way he'd assess a cracked weld. No visible injuries. No tag collar. Upright posture despite the tremor in her legs. Early 20s, he guessed. Close to breaking, but not broken yet. Water, he said, his voice flat and measured. He unclipped the flask and held it out. Her eyes darted from the flask to his face. Suspicion lingered there, sharp and earned. But thirst won. She stepped forward, close enough he could see the pulse flickering under her collarbones, and took the flask with both hands. She drank slow, never taking her eyes off him. Name? He asked. Aura. She handed the flask back, knuckles pale from gripping. Yours? Shaw. He didn't plan to give more. He didn't plan to get involved at all. He hated complications, hated the way they crept into your life and eroded. But the sight of her bare feet on a deck that could drop to freezing when the night cycles lowered the heat made him imagine her body stiffening in the morning. Another problem for the maintenance crews to discard. He had seen too many of those. My quarters, he said finally. 5 junctions east, heat, food, no strings. Her brow furrowed. The words were too direct, too generous for this station. No one says that here. I just did. For a long moment she didn't move. Her breath caught, her shoulders rigid, like she was bracing for the trap that always came after kindness. Then she tucked the 2 credits tight into her palm and stepped behind him. Careful, measured. Her footsteps stayed 2 meters back, as if ready to flee. Shaw kept his stride slow, steady, never turning to look, though he listened for panic in her breathing. None came. At his door, he keyed the lock. The panel slid open on his microsweep 1 bunk, bolted to the wall, console neat, heat panel glowing faint. No clutter, no scent, nothing personal. She stepped inside and froze, hands close to her sides as if afraid to leave a trace. Heat panel, Shaw said, nodding toward it. She went to it and pressed both palms against the surface. A tremor rolled through her shoulders as the warmth spread. A small sound escaped her throat, barely more than a breath. Shaw took a clean undershirt from his locker and set it on the bunk. Wear that? It's warmer. Her gaze stayed sharp, testing, but she obeyed. When she turned back, the shirt hung to her thighs, beads in her hair glinting under the light. Shaw poured a cup of mineral water from the console and handed it over. Slow, he instructed. She sipped, eyes steady now, suspicion loosening fraction by fraction. Shaw stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. He told himself this was temporary, just until she warmed. Just until morning. But he knew even then he had crossed the line. He swore he wouldn't. He had chosen silence too many times before. Tonight, he hadn't. Shaw woke at his usual hour, long before the station's light cycle shifted. The air in Unit 31C carried a faint warmth now, a steady hum of the panel, masking the sterile bite that usually haunted the mornings. He stood quietly at the console, scanning system reports out of habit, listening to the soft rhythm of another person's breathing. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, and yet his jaw didn't lock the way it normally did. Aura lay curled against the panel, blanket drawn around her shoulders. She hadn't moved much during the night. The undershirt hung loose across her collarbone, one pearl bead from her tangled hair glinting on the floor where it had fallen. Her hands were tucked beneath her cheek, fingers still curled like they were holding on to the last thing she trusted. Shaw forced himself back into routine. Reports filed. Jacket on, boots laced. He wasn't going to let this detour dismantle the order that kept him steady. Still, before he left, he pulled 2 sealed ration packs and a hygiene kit from the vending row and slid them into the delivery slot by his door. He didn't knock. She could choose what to do with them. By the time he returned 14 hours later, the corridor was brighter, vents carrying the faint tang of sterilization. He paused outside his own door and listened. Silence. He keyed the lock. Inside, the blanket was folded neatly by the wall. The wrappers from the ration packs had been cleared away. The hygiene kit's package lay crumpled in the bin. Aura sat cross-legged on the bunk, his undershirt still on, hair damp from a rinse, tied back with a strip of her torn veil. In her hands was his tin mug, steam curling from the surface. She looked up as he entered. "You found the brew," Shaw said, voice steady. "You left it obvious," she replied, tone flat, but no longer hollow. He hung his jacket, boots precise against the wall. She watched him the way she had watched the flask the night before, weighing every movement, testing for cost. "Eat?" he asked. "Yes, both packs." A ghost of a smile tugged at her mouth. "Even chewed the seal film." "Instinct," he said. Approval flickered in his tone. For a time, they drank in silence. The hum of the vents filled the gap. Shaw sat across from her, back straight, eyes fixed with the same careful focus he used when inspecting weld seams. She didn't flinch under it. Her skin had color now, not the washed-out pallor of last night, but the deeper blue he suspected was her natural tone. The trembling in her hands had stopped. "Where are you from?" he asked finally. ZTHRA. Her gaze didn't waver. "Festival performer." "Or I was." The crowd left. Security cleared the floor. I had nothing after that. He nodded once. He understood running out of options. "What would you have done tonight?" "Stayed awake until my feet stopped hurting." The answer was delivered without drama, as plain as the 2 credits she'd shown in the corridor. Shaw leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He didn't soften his voice, didn't try to coat it in sympathy. "You can stay here. Use the heat. Eat. Lock the door from the inside." Aura studied him, eyes sharp, searching for the hidden snare she was sure existed. None came. "Why?" she asked at last. "Because you're freezing." The silence that followed was heavy. the kind that pressed into the corners of a room. She broke it by standing, gathering the folded blanket, and setting it on the shelf. "I'll stay here," she said, nodding toward the floor. "That's fine." Shaw moved toward the door. He paused, hand on the panel. "I leave at 0600. If you want me to wait before entering tomorrow, say it now." "Wait before entering," she said quietly. "Done." He stepped out into the corridor. The lock clicked shut behind him. For a long moment, he stood there, hands in his pockets, fighting the urge to turn back. He told himself again that this was temporary. Just until she warmed. Just until morning. But the tightness in his chest told him otherwise. Inside, Aura lay still with her palms flat against the heat panel, her eyes open. The hum of the station pressed on, indifferent. For the first time since the festival ended, her legs stopped shaking. She didn't trust the stillness yet, but she stayed. The morning light rose in precise gradients, alloy panels brightening until shadows retreated into the corners. Shaw stood at his console, already dressed, boots laced, hair damp from a rinse. He scrolled through pressure logs, reading stress points the way other men read news. Behind him, Aura stirred. The sound was light, cautious, but it broke the sterile quiet of Unit 3-1C in a way he hadn't realized he had missed. She sat up slowly on the folded blanket, drawing it tighter around her shoulders. Her hair, still damp from last night's wash, clung in strands to her face. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, blinked at the sterile light, then fixed her gaze on him. There was no panic in her expression now, no flinch. Just steady calculation. "You stayed," she said, double quotes, "yes." He didn't turn from the console. Her eyes flicked to the door, and back to him. "No alarms, none," he confirmed. He poured a cup of brew from the machine and set it on the bunk's shelf without comment. She picked it up with both hands, sipping slow, eyes locked on him. When she set the cup down, her hands weren't shaking anymore. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly. The question landed harder than he expected. Few people on Naira Prime asked personal things. Fewer still cared about answers. He hesitated, then gave her the truth stripped of detail. "I prefer controlled space." "No surprises. Military," she said, not as a question. "Marine Corps. Environmental Division. Deployed across the Sithra core systems. Back. Done." His words fell clipped, like coordinates recited out of habit. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Did you leave? Or did they discard you?" He met her gaze evenly. "I left." A pause. Enough digging people out of collapsed domes that wouldn't have failed if someone had checked the seals. Something softened in her expression then. A flash of recognition, like the edge of shared experience. She didn't push further. Instead, she studied the room with deliberate slowness, eyes moving over the sharp folds of the bunk sheet, the uncluttered console, the perfectly aligned boots. "You keep it clean," she said. "Perfect. But it feels like no one lives here." "That's the point," Shaw replied. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She shifted the blanket, crossing her legs beneath her. "I need to know," she said finally, voice low but steady. "If I stay here for a while, how far does your kindness go?" Shaw set down his pad and leaned forward on his knees. "I won't ask anything of you. Not food, not work, not your body. If you want to stay, you follow 3 rules. Lock the door when you're alone. Don't touch the console without asking. And if you get sick or hurt, you tell me." "That's it." Her jaw tightened. "No one gives shelter without expecting something back." "I'm not no one." The silence that followed was thick enough to press between them. Aura searched his face for cracks, for signs of deceit. She found none. Slowly, she nodded once. "Then I'll stay," she said. Shaw rose without ceremony, went to the cabinet, and pulled out a spare thermal blanket. He placed it on the bunk with precise hands. "From now on, you sleep in the bed. The floor stays cold, even when the air doesn't." Her eyes narrowed. "And you'll still be here?" "Yes." "And you won't touch me?" "No." She studied him another long moment, the muscles in her jaw flexing, then stood. Deliberately, she picked up the folded blanket she had been sleeping on and set it neatly on the shelf. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as though showing she would not disrupt his order without permission. Shaw didn't smile, didn't soften. But as he watched her take her place on the bunk, back straight, eyes steady, he knew something had shifted. She wasn't a guest anymore. Not exactly. She was choosing to stay. For the first time in years, Unit 31C felt occupied. Not cluttered. Not chaotic. Just lived in. The station's next cycle carried the faint tang of sterilization through the vents, that chemical bite Shaw had grown used to. He keyed into Unit 31C at precisely 1900, boots silent on alloy tiles. The door slid shut behind him with a clean hiss, and for the first time he noticed the room didn't look exactly as he had left it. His datapads, usually stacked flush, were aligned so precisely on the console it was obvious someone else's hands had touched them. Towels hung from the rack in balanced pairs. Even the mugs gleamed, washed and set side by side on the shelf. The space felt warmer, not only from the panel, but from the order of someone else's presence, shaping it. Aura sat cross-legged on the bunk. Her hair, still damp, was tied back with a strip of veil, beads catching light with each shift of her head. The undershirt clung loose to her shoulders, and she wore scavenged shorts from the bottom locker. When she looked at him, her gaze didn't dart to the door like before. It held steady. "You came back," she said. "I said I would. Most don't." He unhooked his jacket, placed it with mechanical care, then set a sealed ration pack on the shelf. "Eat this. Higher nutrient load than yesterday's." She tore it open, chewing slowly. "You don't ask where I go when you're gone," she said between bites. "You didn't leave. You were sure of that?" "Yes." Her brows lifted, not in challenge but curiosity. "Most men would have searched me. Or the room. I'm not most men." Her lips curved faintly, then flattened, as if she didn't trust the flicker of humor to stay. She pressed her palm against the heat panel, out of habit, soaking the warmth into her skin. Shaw leaned against the console, arms folded, watching her movements with the same measured focus he used in the ducts. "Tell me something," he said finally. "What brought you here?" No one drifts to Naira Prime by accident. Her eyes stayed on the panel. "Stra's markets dried up. Festivals ended. I danced to eat. At first it worked. Then it didn't. Tried orbital circuits. Failed every entry exam. No education record. No sponsor. Came here. Only station still taking walk-ins." Her voice was flat, almost clinical. "I lasted 2 weeks. Crew cut me when they realized I wouldn't sell more than dance. After that, I had 1 chip left. Spent it on a corridor badge. Walked until I couldn't." She turned, lifted the dented badge from the shelf, held it up as proof. "Might be the only thing I own the system still recognizes." "Keep it," Shaw said. "You might need it." Her fingers tightened on the badge. Something flickered across her expression gratitude, wrapped in something sharper, like defiance against needing anyone at all. She tucked it back into the folds of her veil. "Did you fix the scene by the console today?" he asked, noticing a strip of fabric sealing a draft. "Yes," from the veil hem. "It holds." Smart. The words landed heavier than he intended. She turned, folding her arms. "What about you? Why this station? Why alone?" He hesitated. No one here had ever asked. After the war, They offered promotion, desk work, more pay, another decade. I said no. Chose inspections. Simple work. No command. You don't want to be needed, she said. I don't want to be depended on, he corrected. Being needed is fine. Being someone's last hope gets people killed. Aura's lips pressed thin. Her eyes locked on him. And yet you picked me up off the floor. That was different. Why? He didn't answer immediately. His gaze held hers, steady, unflinching. Because everyone else walked past. The silence stretched, heavy but no longer hostile. Something in the air shifted, the same way pressure changed before a crack revealed itself in the ducts. Not threatening, just undeniable. Aura broke it by scattering her beads across the console shelf, letting them roll and clink softly. The audit's tomorrow, she said. If they want proof I belong here, it should look real. Shaw almost smiled. Controlled chaos, he said. She met his eyes, her expression unreadable. But when she started leaving mugs in mismatched places and draping a towel half off the rack, she did it with deliberate care. She was staying. And for the first time, Shaw didn't resist the change. He let it settle. The chime of the audit clerk had faded hours ago, yet the echo of it still lingered in Shaw's muscles. He sat on the bunk, boots planted, hands loose on his knees, watching the steam curl from his mug. Across from him, Aura crouched near the cabinet, tucking the last of her veil strips onto a shelf she had claimed. She moved carefully, not apologetically, but with a precision that mirrored his own. Each gesture said, I belong here, and I won't vanish when you turn away. The room itself bore the proof. 2 towels on the rack, 2 mugs drying side by side, beads scattered like a careless signature across the console shelf. It no longer looked like a sterile unit balanced over storms. It looked lived in. When she rose, she carried a small parcel wrapped in cloth. She set it on the bunk beside him, her posture steady, but her fingers tightening around the edges. Open it. Shaw hesitated. He wasn't used to receiving anything except system reports and sealed ration packs. Still, he peeled back the fabric. Inside lay 2 alloy cups, slim and matte, their edges polished smooth. Found them in a supply chute, Aura said. Cracked, useless. She shifted her weight, eyes flicking to his face. Not anymore. He turned one over in his hand. The seams were sealed clean, no jagged edges, no fractures. They were perfect. You repaired these? I had time. Her voice was level, but beneath it ran a thread of something quieter. Almost fragile. Shaw set the cups carefully on the shelf beside the mugs. They're flawless, he said, and meant it. For the first time since he'd seen her, her expression shifted openly. Relief broke across her face, sharp as light through storm clouds. She looked down quickly, hiding it, but he had already seen that they cooked one of the higher-grade ration pouches that night, the kind he usually saved for long shifts in frozen ducks. Shaw cut the blocks with his blade as if they were crystal, precise slices. Aura stirred them down into a thick stew, hands steady on the handle. Their movements fell into rhythm, measuring, her mixing, both working without words. When they ate, they sat close on the bunk. Their knees touched, neither pulling back. Shaw chewed in silence, the faint heat of her shoulder brushing against his. It wasn't the kind of silence that gnawed. It was steady. Anchoring. Afterward, he wiped his knife and she cleaned the mugs. She hummed under her breath, soft, tuneless, but it filled the sterile air with something that didn't belong to the station. He didn't stop her. Later, Shaw opened the narrow cabinet and shifted his folded undershirts to one side. He left half the shelf empty and turned to her. Yours. Aura blinked as if she hadn't expected it. She picked up a repaired skirt and veil wrap from her pile and placed them neatly beside his clothes. She closed the cabinet with deliberate slowness. "This is real now," she said quietly. "It was real when you chose to stay," Shaw replied. Her shoulders eased, just enough to show something inside her had unclenched. She looked around the room again, the 2 cups, the scattered beads, the cabinet half filled, and when her eyes came back to his, they no longer held suspicion. That night, she sat on the bunk with the blanket pulled to her waist. He started toward the console out of habit, but she caught his wrist before he could sit. "Here," she said, patting the space beside her. He hesitated, every instinct telling him to retreat into order, into distance. Then he sat. She lay on her side facing him, hand tucked beneath her cheek. He stayed upright a long time, boots on the floor, watching the faint glow of her skin in the dim light. "You're still tense," she murmured. "It takes time to stop expecting collapse," he said. "Then I'll stay until it stops." Her eyes closed, breathing slowing. Shaw sat still, listening to the hum of the panel, feeling the warmth where her knees brushed his leg. He realized, with a clarity that startled him, that he no longer wanted her to leave. For the first time in years, Unit 31C didn't feel like a shelter waiting to crack. It felt like the beginning of something permanent. The storms beneath Naira Prime rumbled in cyan arcs, their light pulsing faintly through the viewport. Inside, Unit 31C, the air was warmer than Shaw could ever remember it being. Not just from the heat panel, but from the rhythm of 2 people moving in quiet orbit around each other. Dadora stood near the viewport, arms folded, hair loose down her back. Beads caught the dim light, flickering like sparks in the dark. She didn't turn when she spoke. "I thought warmth would feel like weakness." Her voice was calm, almost curious. Shaw leaned against the console, sleeves rolled, mug cooling in his hands. "It doesn't?" She shifted, the reflection of stormlight washing across her blue skin. "No," she admitted. "It's what lets you hold steady?" He studied her profile. The woman who had clutched 2 credits in her hands days ago was gone. This version of her stood straighter, less guarded, as if the station's weight no longer pressed her flat against the floor. She turned then, amber eyes fixed on him with a clarity that pinned him in place. "You said I could stay as long as I want. I meant it." Her hands curled at her sides. "And if I don't leave?" "Then you don't." His answer came steady, without hesitation. Something changed in her face at that. A slow release, like she had been holding her breath for days and finally let it go. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them until her knees brushed his. Her hands rose, tentative, palms pressing lightly against his chest. Shaw didn't move. He let her decide. "I don't want to be a guest," she said. "You're not." Her arms slid around him, slow and deliberate. There was no performance in the gesture, no plea. Just a choice made in silence. Shaw rapped, his arms around her in return, steady and sure, holding her as if the world beyond the alloy walls didn't exist. The station hummed its mechanical rhythm, but for once it felt distant, irrelevant dot when she finally pulled back. It wasn't far. Her face hovered close, her breath brushing his jaw. Her eyes searched his for cracks, for hidden rules. She found none. She leaned in, her lips brushing his, soft but certain. Shaw's hand rose instinctively to steady her at the small of her back, anchoring her as if she might vanish if he let go. The kiss wasn't hurried. It was slow, firm, deliberate like every motion of his life, but different in one vital way. It wasn't meant to preserve order. It was meant to hold something fragile and new. When she drew back just enough to breathe, her voice came low, almost a whisper. "I'm not passing through. You never were," he said. The words landed heavy between them, sealing something that had already begun. Aura rested her forehead against his collarbone, her hand still fisted lightly in his shirt. Shaw closed his eyes, letting the tension that usually lived in his jaw ease away. Later, when the lights dimmed into night cycle, they lay on the bunk together. No space left between them, no second blanket dividing bed from floor. Her head rested under his jaw, her hair trailing across his chest, fingers tangled with his. He stayed still, letting the unfamiliar weight of someone choosing to remain anchor him. Outside, lightning forked silently across the clouds below. Inside Unit 31C, Shaw breathed in rhythm with Aura. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was bracing for collapse. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe the walls would hold. Morning rose in precise gradients, alloy panels shifting from gray to sharp white. Shaw woke before the cycle completed, as always, but this time he didn't move. Aura's body was curled into his, her forehead pressed beneath his jaw, her hand resting light against his ribs. Her breathing was slow, and even her skin faintly warm. He stayed still, letting his chest rise and fall against the weight of her, as if testing whether the moment was real. When the final lights reached full brightness, Aura stirred. Her eyes opened, amber flecked with gold, hazy from sleep. She blinked once, then focused on him. "You're watching me, making sure you're real," Shaw said. A faint smile touched her mouth, the smallest curve of lips. "I am." She pushed herself up on one elbow, hair spilling in red strands across his chest. For the first time, there was no tension in her shoulders, no glance toward the door, no trace of the girl who had stood barefoot in the corridor clutching 2 credits. She reached for his wrist, where the thin steel band he wore glowed faint green from its link to the station grid. Her gaze flicked to her own wrist. The new band he had fitted there pulsed faintly in response. "You filed it," she said. Double quotes, yes, double quotes. Her hand turned, watching the light trace over her skin. "So this is permanent. It can be, if you want it." Her voice stayed steady, but her throat moved with the swallow of someone taking a step he'd never expected to take. "I want it." Shaw sat up, boots on the floor, grounding himself. He had thought he knew permanence contracts, deployments, sealed bulkheads. This was different. He felt it settle inside him, like a weld cooling into place. They ate together, 2 mugs and 2 ration packs, nothing ceremonial, but anchored by rhythm. Afterward, he filed his shift logs, and she busied herself with the cabinet, folding the skirt she had repaired, aligning it with his shirts. The space no longer looked borrowed. It looked shared, but when Shaw checked the console later that evening, something caught his eye. A line of system text buried in the residency record, not visible in the front file. "Pending verification. Origin ZTHRA. Review required." His jaw locked for the first time in days that Aura noticed. "What is it?" He turned the console screen toward her. Her amber eyes flicked over the words. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. Her fingers only tightened on the edge of the bunk. "So it isn't clean." "Not yet," Shaw said. His voice was flat, calm, the same tone he used when describing a fractured weld. "It means someone will look deeper. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for weeks. But eventually." She held his gaze. No fear, only quiet defiance. "Then we face it together." For a long moment, neither moved. The hum of the heat panel filled the silence. Shaw thought of ducts splitting under pressure, seams breaking where no one had checked. He thought of everyone else who had walked past her in the corridor. He met her eyes again, and for the first time, allowed himself to smile. The storms raged below, lightning carving cyan rivers across the clouds. Inside Unit 31C, Aura slid closer, her hand resting firm against his. A system might come for her file. The station might pry into what they had built. But the bond they had forged was already stronger than any weld seam he had ever inspected. For the first time in years, Shaw didn't just believe the walls would hold. He believed he had someone to hold them with.